So in circumstances whereby we cannot easily get the roots of a quadratic equation, we employ a method called completing squares. Now, completing squares is a method we use. It's a technique we use to make this side of the equation a perfect square so that we are able to go ahead and calculate the value of x. Now, what is a perfect square? Let me show you a few examples of what I mean by perfect square. If you look at that number here, if we are to factorize this number like we've been doing in our previous videos, we are supposed to get two numbers giving us a sum of 10 and a product of 25. And where do we get these two numbers? We get these two numbers from the factors of 25. And one of the factors of 25 is 5 times 5. 5 times 5 gives us 25. So from 5 times 5, you find that we are able to get 25. Then 5 plus 5 gives us 10. So we use these two numbers, 5 and 5, to come and replace this middle term. That is why in our next step, it is x squared plus, we ignore this middle term and we say it is 5x plus 5x, then plus 25. Then we introduce brackets here and there, which is in our next step. And then we factorize this. X comes out of the brackets. X squared divided by x gives us x. 5x divided by x gives us 5. Then also likewise, the common factor here is 5. So 5x divided by 5 is x. Then 25 divided by 5 is 5. So you end up having x plus 5 in one bracket. Then the terms in the brackets in another bracket. And you realize that it is x plus 5, which is the same term. And we end up having x plus 5 squared. So because we are having x plus 5 squared, it means that the roots of this quadratic equation is the same. It is 5. So this makes this quadratic expression a perfect square. It is the same in our next expression. We are still going to get two numbers to factorize this. Those two numbers should be giving us a sum of negative 18 when we add them. And also when we multiply them, they are supposed to give us a product of 81. And we get these numbers from the factors of 81, and one of the factors of 81 is 9 and 9. So 9 times 9, negative 9 times negative 9 gives us 81. Negative 9 plus negative 9 gives us negative 18. So you realize that these are the two numbers, the roots. So these two, negative 9 and negative 9, are going to displace this middle term. When they displace that middle term, it means that from here, our next step is going to become x squared. Instead of putting this, we shall come and say it's minus 9, minus 9x plus 81. Then we introduce brackets, and we go ahead and factorize this. The common factor here is x, so it is x into x minus 9. Then likewise here, we factor out the 9. It is minus 9 into x minus 9. So the terms outside the brackets are put in one bracket. The terms inside the brackets are put in their own bracket. And you realize that it's x minus 9, which is the same as x minus 9 squared. So you find that we are having, this quadratic equation is having the same root, which is 9 and 9. So it means, because we have x minus 9 squared as the factorized expression of this quadratic equation, it makes this quadratic equation a perfect square. So now, back to our earlier number. When you're having a number like this, whereby we are trying to look for these two numbers. We are trying to look for these two numbers that are supposed to displace this middle term. We are trying to look for them, but we have failed to get them. When we fail to get them, then we do what we call completing squares. Now, when we complete squares, we attempt to make this side of the equation to become a perfect square. When we make this side of the equation a perfect square, then we are able to solve this quadratic equation simply. So our main purpose of trying to complete squares is simple: to make this side of the equation a perfect square. And when we make this side of the equation a perfect square, then we are able to solve the quadratic equation and find the values of x. So we'll go ahead and begin our working. So in our working here, our first step is, first we are supposed to make this x go that side. So this is going to become x squared plus 10 is going to be equal to this negative 7 comes this way, it becomes 7. So this is 10 squared plus 10x. So from that point, this is what we do. We are going to look at the coefficient of x, which is 10. We divide it by 2. When we divide the coefficient of x by 2, then we are going to, the answer we get, we square it. After squaring the answer we get, we add it on both sides of this equation. When we add it on both sides of this equation, you will realize that in this part of the equation, this part of the equation has become a perfect square, and when it becomes a perfect square, then we can solve the quadratic equation. So we shall begin. We have 10x. 10x, so we get the coefficient of x, which is 10. That is 10. Divide 10 by 2. When we divide 10 by 2, we get 5. So the answer we get, we square it. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So the answer here we are getting is 25. So what do? We get this 25 and we add it on both sides of this equation. So from this point we shall say it is going to be x squared plus 10x plus 25 is going to be equal to 7 plus 25. And then from there we realize that we finding the sum and product of this, factorizing this expression, we need to look for the other two numbers, giving us a sum of 10 and a product of 25. And of course the two numbers here are 5 times 5, because 5 times 5 is 25. 5 plus 5 is 10. So we come and use them to displace this middle term. So this is going to end up being x squared. Instead of that we say plus 5x plus 5x plus 25 is going to give us 7 plus 25, which is going to give us 32. So when we put this in brackets and that in brackets, we factor out this. This is going to be x out of the brackets into x plus 5 into, factor this 5 outside the brackets into x plus 5 is equal to 32. So you realize that from this point we are having x plus 5 into x plus 5 is equal to 32. So this becomes x plus 5 squared is equal to 32. Now you realize that when we did this, we made this side of the equation a perfect square. It's a perfect square that is equal to 32. So we go ahead and find the value of x by employing the square root property. So it means for us to find the value of x means we are going to find the square root on both sides. Of course, square root of 32 is either a positive or a negative. So this square root sign dies with that. You remain with x plus 5 being equal to plus or minus the square root of 32. So definitely from this point we have x plus 5 being equal to plus or minus the square root of 32. And of course, when this 5 crosses to come this way, you remain with either x giving you 5, this is negative 5, plus or minus the square root of 32. So in this case, either x will be equal to negative 5 plus the root of 32, or our value of x is going to be negative 5 minus the square root of 32. So we are going to solve this quadratic equation by completing squares. When we are completing squares, our first step will be x squared minus 8x is going to be equal to this 2 has to cross to come this side. So it becomes negative 2 on that side. So we'll begin again. We look at the coefficient of x. Now this coefficient of x, we are going to first divide it by 2. When we divide it by 2, the answer we get is negative 4. Now the answer we get is supposed to be squared. When we square the answer, the answer we get is 16. So it is this 16 that we are going to add on both sides of this equation. So it means our next step is going to be x squared minus 8x. Then we shall add the 16 we got here. Is going to be equal to negative 2 plus that 16. Now, the reason as to why we do that is, in so doing, we have made this side of the equation a perfect square. So we'll continue working in that light. So factorizing this equation means that you're supposed to get two numbers to split this middle term into 2. The two numbers should be giving us a sum of negative 8, and when we add those two numbers, they're supposed to be giving us a product of 16. And in identifying those two numbers, you realize that those two numbers are 4 and 4. Because 4 times 4 is going to give us 16, but if we add 4 plus 4, will it give us negative 8? No. So if we make this a negative and that a negative, negative 4 plus negative 4 gives us negative 8. Negative 4 times negative 4 gives us positive 16. So the numbers here are negative 4 and negative 4. So negative 4 and negative 4 are the ones that are going to replace that middle term. So it means our next step is going to be x squared minus 4x plus 16 is going to give us negative 2 plus 16, which is 14. So definitely when we introduce here brackets, the common factor here definitely is going to be x into x minus 4. Common factor here is still going to be negative 4 into negative 4 divided by 4 is going to become x minus 4 is going to be equal to 14. And of course the terms outside the brackets here are what we put them in their own bracket into the terms inside the brackets, which is x minus 4 is going to give us 14. You realize that this is x minus 4, which is the same as saying x minus 4 squared is equal to 14. Now this is a perfect square. X minus 4 squared is what we was derived from this. So we go ahead and find the value of x using the square root property. So the value of x here is going to be, we find square roots on both sides to eliminate that square sign. When we find the square root here and the square root here, this goes with that. Of course, x minus 4 is going to be equal to the square root of 4, which is either a positive or a negative. So it means this is going to become x minus 4 is going to be equal to the square root of 4, which is either positive or negative, square root of 14. So this has to come that side. So you remain with the value of x as it's going to become positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 14. So from here we have two values of x. Either our value of x is going to be equal to 4 plus root of 14, or our value of x is going to be 4 minus the square root of 14. And those are our two values of x. Now from this number you will notice that when we are trying to complete squares so that we make this side of the equation a perfect square, when we do so you realize that at this point, when after we've shifted this negative 2 to come this side and we are remaining with 8, it means when we divide 8 by 2 we get 4. Negative 8 divided by 2, when we divide it by 2 we get negative 4. So this number we get after we have divided, you can simply come and say it is going to be x minus 4 squared. So it means we can avoid this step by simply saying that when we are after this step, we can say it's going to become negative 8 divided by 2. The answer we get is what we call is negative 4. So we come here and say x minus that number 4 squared is equal to 14. And we avoid these steps. It's the same with the number we did before. If you look at the number we did before, it's still the same thing. If you look at this value of 10, we said it is 10 divided by 2. 10 divided by 2, we get 5. So it means it's going to be x plus 5 in brackets squared, which is what we got here. So it was x plus 5 squared, and we continue with our working. I'm going to demonstrate this in our next example. In our next example, we are required to solve that number while completing squares. So this definitely is equal to 0. So solving that using completing squares, it's still going to become x squared minus 3x is. So x squared minus 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. So we are going to complete squares. Completing squares here means that you're supposed to first put it in this form. It means negative 1 cross this equal signs to come this way. That's how we end up with x squared minus 3x is equal to 1. The 1 is this way. So from this level, we divide both sides by, we see the at this level we see the coefficient of x, which is negative 3. So we see negative 3. We divide it by 2. Of course, negative 3 divided by 2 is going to be equal to negative 1.5. So for us to get the perfect square here is negative 3 divided by 2 to get 1.5. So this negative 3 over 2, after dividing the coefficient of x by 2, we simply come here and say it's going to be x. Negative 3 divided by 2, it gave us that. So it's going to be negative 3 over 2. All this squared is going to be equal to the answer we got here, which is negative 1.5. We're supposed to square it. Of course, when you square it, this is 1 plus 3 squared is 9. Negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Divide that by 2 times 2, which is 4. I want to relate this to some of the numbers we did before. If you look at this number here, if we were at this level, it would simply have been, from that level, it is 10 divided by 2. What is 10 divided by 2? It is 5. So we would simply come from this level, would say it's going to be x plus 10 divided by 2 is 5. Then we simply say this is squared, is going to be equal to 7 plus now this 5 squared. 7 plus 5 squared, which is 25. Like that. And this is the same level here. Would avoid all this. So it's what we are trying to do here as we are completing squares. The shortcut here would be that this number divide by 2. So it's going to be negative 3 over 2 squared. Then it's going to be equal to 1 plus this term squared. And that term squared is 9 over 4. And the rest is just arithmetic. So we are going to find the square root of that number on both sides to try and get the number. So it's going to become the square root of this side and that side. This goes with that. We remain with x minus 3 over 2, giving us 1 plus 9 over 4, which is x squared plus 10x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now we are meant to solve that number using completing squares. I'm going to use the shortcut. So this is going to become x squared plus 10x is going to be equal to this 6. Moves this side, it becomes positive 6. So what we do here, it's going to become, we have 10 here, 10x. So it's going to become x plus 10. 10 divided by 5, 10 divided by 2, dividing this by 2 means you're going to get 5. So it's going to become plus 5, and this is going to be squared, is going to be equal to 6. Then 6 plus, you square this. What is 5 times 5? 5 times 5 is 25, so it's going to be plus 25. So you've completed squares. So the rest is obvious. 6 plus 5 squared is going to be equal to 6. This is going to be 21. So when you find the square root on both sides, this is plus or minus. This goes with that. You remain with x plus 5, giving you plus or minus the square root of 21. So here, when this 5 goes that side, you remain with your value of x, giving you negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 21. So you have two values of x. X is either negative 5 plus root of 2 of 21, or the value of x here is negative 5 minus the square root of 21. Actually, 6 plus 25 is 31, so it is actually root of 31, not 21 like I had earlier said. It's 31 here and 31 right there. As we solve this using completing squares, we are going to have to convert this thing to come that side. So it's going to become x squared minus 12x is equal to 3. So you look at this number, the 12, the coefficient of x, which is negative 12. What is negative 12 divided by 2? Negative 12 divided by 2 is 6. So it is negative 6. So it means that the answer here will be x. Negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. And this is squared. That's the perfect square from this. It's going to be equal to 3. Now 3, we are supposed to add this number squared. So negative 6 squared is positive 36. So it's plus 36. So of course the answer we have here is x minus 6 squared is going to give us 39. We find the square root of the number on both sides and get our values of x. This brings us to the end of this video. Up next is more of this. I urge you to stay tuned for more videos. Please remember to subscribe. This is Arnold Rangakuramya on behalf of Kisembo Academy.